Major breaking news out of the NBA where the Utah Jazz have traded Donovan Mitchell to the Cleveland Cavaliers. That is according to ESPN. The Jazz will receive 3 unprotected first-round picks along with 2 pick swaps in exchange for the 3-time All-Star. They also get Lauri Markkanen, Colin Sexton, and 2022 first-round pick Ochai Agbaji. That is a bunch. Donovan Mitchell spending the first 5 years of his career there in Salt Lake City. He will now join a Cavs core consisting of Darius Garland, Jarrett Allen, and Karis LeVert. Let's welcome in Bill Ryder to talk about this breaking news. We knew he was going to go somewhere. Last check, Bill, there was so much talk about Donovan Mitchell potentially to the Knicks, and here come the Cavs sweeping in.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is a typical Danny Ainge blockbuster trade. Ainge now in charge of basketball operations in Utah for a long time. Obviously was in charge in Boston. And I know we'll get into all the details, but this is that's a remarkable haul. Those are some really talented basketball players. Before you get into those 3 unprotected first-round picks you talked about and the 2 pick swaps, this is, look, we can talk about Cleveland. I think it's interesting for Cleveland. It's a very good day for Utah.
Yeah, and going back, I mean, all the way from the Rudy Gobert trade and everything that they have, I mean, Utah has a haul right now. How good are things looking for them over the course of the next couple of years?
If you look at Danny Ainge and his track record of drafting at a really high level, developing talent, obviously he's the guy that identified Brad Stevens when Stevens was the head coach in Boston at creating the right culture. It's 2 or 3 years out, but I think things look really promising. I mean, let's get into some of these players. Let's just talk about Colin Sexton. This is a guy who before injury was going to be a long-term part of that Cleveland Cavaliers backcourt. If he can get back to his old form, I and a lot of other people, Amanda, out around the NBA, think he alone could be a really dynamic player. I mean, this is a Utah team that is loaded with young talent now, that has a ridiculous number of first-round draft picks in the years ahead. They are going to be a force to be reckoned with. It's a long ways down the road. It's not today, but over the next 2 or 3 or 4 years, knowing what we know about Danny Ainge and his ability to draft properly, they're going to be really good.
Well, and mentioning Colin Sexton there, according to reports, a 4-year, $72 million contract via sign and trade. So he's going to be there for a while. I mean, unless, of course, potentially if at some point he gets moved, but that gives them a little bit of a core.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, you're talking about already the pieces of a pretty good basketball team. You can kind of see the outlines. Maybe like Oklahoma City have some nice players there, need to add more. But again, it's just going to be draft pick after draft pick after draft pick after draft pick. And well, I actually think the move for Cleveland in some ways makes some sense. I understand the ambition of their GM, Kobe Altman, in that market for particular reasons. The reality is things could go badly. Those picks are unprotected. And we know from what Danny Ainge pulled when he was with the Celtics, with the Nets when they were still in Jersey, there's the chance those picks could be incredibly valuable down the line if things don't go to form and don't go to plan for Cleveland.
So talk about what this means for Cleveland. They were one of those somewhat surprising teams that performed better than we anticipated last season. They went 44-38. We're dealing with some injuries. How does Donovan Mitchell now play in?
So look, maybe I'll rue these words down the line, Amanda. So my first reaction is that I like it for Cleveland, even though my second reaction is, oh my God, look at what they've given away for a few reasons. First, I think their core, Darius Garland, Evan Mobley in particular, is really impressive. And I think some of the run of form we saw last season, when at times they looked like a competitor for a top 4 or 5 spot in the Eastern Conference, that's legit and something they're going to build on. You bring in Donovan Mitchell. We know he can get buckets. We've seen him in the playoffs and otherwise go off for 50 or 60 points. He can be a difference maker for a few games in a series. And the reality is it's an ambitious organization. That owner, love him or hate him, wants to win now all the time. And Cleveland, and I say this as a guy who's married to, my wife's from Ohio, not far from Cleveland. I'm from Iowa. I'm not taking shots, but it's not an easy place to recruit talent to. It's just not. You have to draft that talent and hope you develop superstars. So from their perspective, to go out and get Donovan Mitchell, who is or can be a superstar for 4 more years, he's only a 25-year-old. There's different pressures in that kind of a place. I think it makes sense when Colin Sexton just feels like he's extra to what they want to do. He's valuable, but maybe not to what they were building. It's a lot of picks, but they feel like they've drafted well already. I understand it, and I think it could work out for the Cavaliers.
Do you see them making any more moves before the season begins?
I don't think. I mean, look, you never know because obviously Kobe Altman has put all of the chips, not just for his organization, but really his own standing in that organization in the middle of the table. But I think they're really well constructed now. They've got great guards. They've got Mobley. They have a young team. They've got some veterans on that team like Kevin Love and Ricky Rubio, who I think are important to that culture. I know for a fact, just talking to people in that Cavs organization over the offseason, they liked what they'd already had and what they'd already built before this trade. So they're going to look at this trade and certainly the massive return that goes to Utah, what they have to give away in the future. But the Cavs are going to look at this trade, Amanda, and they're going to feel like, if not the first tier, they're absolutely in that second tier in the Eastern Conference, able to compete most nights with anybody, and with a young core that's going to get better year after year.
Bill Ryder, we appreciate it. Breaking news there, Donovan Mitchell to the Cavs, but in return, the Jazz getting a ton in return. Almost too much to talk about there, but we're going to put it on there. Lauri Markkanen, Colin Sexton, Ochai Agbaji, also 3 unprotected first-round picks, 2 pick swaps, all in return for Donovan Mitchell. Coming up next here on CBS Sports HQ, we continue to follow this breaking news. Donovan Mitchell traded to the Cavs. We have much more on the other side.
Yay, the Jazz sending Donovan Mitchell to the Cavs for a haul. The Jazz receiving 3 unprotected first-round picks, along with 2 pick swaps. And Colin Sexton, Lauri Markkanen, and this year's first-round pick, Ochai Agbaji. That all according to ESPN. All the Cavs get is the Spider. Donovan Mitchell. Sportsline crunching the numbers, and the numbers don't change that much for either team. In fact, Utah's win total goes up from 32 to about 33 wins. Cleveland's playoff chances do rise by about 5%, from 50-50 to 54.5% with Donovan Mitchell to make the postseason. All right, let's get Colin Ward-Henniger in here, one of our NBA writers. Colin, at first blush, it seems like Utah fleeced the Cavs on this deal. You buying that?
I don't think they fleeced them. I mean, this is what the deal was expected to be for Donovan Mitchell. I don't think anyone expected it to be the Cleveland Cavaliers to be the team that come in and get him. But I think this was the haul that was expected. And this is the reason that the negotiations were kind of hung up with the Knicks. They didn't want to include that 3rd unprotected first-round pick. And the Cavs decided that they were willing to do that. I think that they have enough of a foundation there in Darius Garland, Jared Allen, Evan Mobley, and now Donovan Mitchell, that they're going to be able to continue to improve without necessarily having those first-round picks. So this is a calculation on their part. I don't know. It's certainly a ton to give up for a player like Donovan Mitchell. But look, he's young. He's an all-star. He's put up 50 points in a playoff game, and he's got a lot of years left on his contract. So this is a gamble on their part, but I think it's a calculated gamble. And to me, it makes sense. I don't think a lot of people saw the Cavs as a potential suitor for Donovan Mitchell. But now that you see it all on paper, you see the roster construction, I think it's a good move for the Cavs, even at that steep price.
Okay, so please explain to me how Donovan Mitchell's worth 3 unprotected first-round picks, 2 pick swaps, Colin Sexton, Ochai Agbaji, and Lauri Markkanen.
Well, these are players that you have to think weren't in the Cavs' future anyway, right? Like Colin Sexton was a 25-point-a-game scorer almost when he was healthy. But now you look at that roster, you have Darius Garland, who's improved. You have Karis LeVert on the roster. He probably wasn't going to have that type of impact. So that's kind of a sunk cost. Lauri Markkanen was their 3rd big. They tried to start him at small forward last year. That didn't really work out. Agbaji is a nice player, but he's still unproven. And obviously the picks are what they are, but we've seen in the NBA that, if you're going to be a good team, those first round picks are going to be, 14, 15, possibly into the 20s. So Donovan Mitchell, I think he's kind of fallen out of the graces of NBA writers and just the NBA fans in general, because the Jazz have kind of underperformed in the last couple postseasons. But to me, this is a player who can absolutely be the best player potentially on a championship team down the road, provided the right pieces around him. And his defensive shortcomings are going to be made up for by Jared Allen and Evan Mobley protecting the rim. So I understand the calculus there. Time will tell if it's going to be worth all that they've given up, but I see what the Cavs were thinking.
As you mentioned, the picks are down the road. For this season in particular, You and the Cavs feel like this gives them an opportunity to take a step up in the Eastern Conference. They now have what's being called on social media right now, a core four of players 25 years and younger that now includes Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland, Evan Mobley, and Jarrett Allen. What does that make them in the East?
Yeah, I think, this is a move that is ultimately what pretty much every NBA team wants to do, which is a move that will help you win now and also help build for the future. So right now, are they as good as the Celtics, the Bucks, maybe the 76ers? I don't think so. They're still, a lot of wing pieces away from getting there. But as you said, that core four is enough to make you competitive right now. They're, in that mix for the 5-6 seed in the East. Possibly better if the pieces mesh together, and maybe they're able to add some more as the season goes along before the trade deadline. But ultimately, I think that this move isn't something saying, okay, now the Cavs are going to be a championship contender next year. But if all the pieces align right in 2-3 years, could they be there in the mix at the top of the Eastern Conference? Absolutely, depending on how things shake out. So as I said, I don't think that this makes the Cavs a championship contender right now. But for the future, this is definitely a team to keep your eye on in terms of being competitive in the Eastern Conference.
What about for Utah, trading away Rudy Gobert to Minnesota to begin the offseason, and now Donovan Mitchell starting over with a new head coach? They have so many picks, it's almost hard to even wrap your mind around how many picks they're going to have and how many young players. I mean, they in essence just got a first-round lottery pick from just a couple of months ago in Ochai Agbaji in this trade as well. So what do the Jazz have, and how can they work it together?
Yeah, this was kind of the plan for Danny Ainge. You could tell that the Utah Jazz core had kind of worn out its welcome. Things weren't working there. The playoff performance was obviously disappointing against the Dallas Mavericks. So when they hired Will Hardy as head coach, I think the writing was on the wall. This was going to be a rebuild. Now, whether this happened immediately or whether it happened over the course of next season, over the next couple of years, will still remain to be seen. But as you can see, Danny Ainge was waiting to get the right deals. The Gobert haul was astronomical. It was something that not a lot of people saw coming. And now he saw exactly what he wanted to get for Donovan Mitchell, some good young players and a ton of picks. And now they're in position to tank. I know the projections say that they're going to improve wins-wise. I don't think that's going to be the case. I think Danny Ainge is going to run down from the front office and make sure that team wins about 18 to 20 games this year so that they're in the mix for Victor Wembanyama, one of the best prospects we've ever seen coming up in the upcoming NBA draft. But this is a team that's going to be in the tank. There's no mixing words. They are not going to be trying to win. They are going to try to see which of these young pieces they want to continue with and which they can flip into future assets. But as you said,